And welcome to another COS Chats. It's a pleasure to have my friend Dan Reagan, who wrote a great book, I should say books, volume 1 and 2, along with Kathleen LaCroix. It's called Classic Rock Songs Revealed. And what Dan has done is basically, he's sort of like the guy behind the musical curtain, because when you peel it back, he's got so many great artists. I mean, it's almost impossible not to dig all the people that he has on this book, between the Eagles, Billy Joel, the Doors. I mean, you name it, he's got them in there. So if you're a classic rock fan, you're going to love the books. By the way, they'll be on sale at classicrocksrevealed.com next week. You can pre-sale them now, and part of the proceeds go to charity. And Dan, welcome. And we have been talking about this book for a long period of time, and I just can't say enough how proud of you. Dan's also a multiple Emmy-winning sports TV director. He's been a musicologist ever since I've known him, so this is just awesome.
Thanks, guys. Yes, this is the continuation of a more than 25-year conversation you and I have been having.
Yeah, but it's,
and
hey,
we finally reached the end.
Persistency pays, and that's the key. So putting this book together, you always had this dream of getting it down for artists of what their songs, how their songs started, between the lyrics, the melody. And, you know, for people that listen to music and love music, and everybody does, probably nobody thinks about, oh, how did that happen? And you're kind of peeling the onion one at a time on all these great people, which is just amazing. One of my favorite analogies in the book is from the amazing Billy Joel. And you asked him about his process, because all songwriters and groups have different processes. Billy seems to have a little trouble writing the lyrics.
Yes, the music is not a problem for him. In fact, I was really fascinated by, I had seen a special on Billy Joel on the Discovery Channel as I was leading up to this, and it talked about how he dreamt all of his music, how all of his songs, all of the songs that he writes, the music comes to him in his dreams. And we went through that whole process. But then to answer your question, the lyrics, he equated the lyrics to a woman in labor giving birth to a child. And that's how hard and difficult lyric writing was for him. And not just him, other artists as well. But he said that the lyrics were really hard, were the hardest part of songwriting for him.
That's amazing. And just think how many kids he would have in pain. He has enough money to pay for the labor bills, but anyway, so that's kind of interesting. Putting this book together and connecting with all these artists, did you have like a preconceived notion maybe on some artists, how their songs were developed at all?
You know, I don't know if I had a preconceived notion. I went into this thinking wrongly, as it turns out. I always thought that these musicians, these singer-songwriters, had poetry in their breeding. You know, that they would sit down and write some lyrics out, poetry or what have you, and then they would, you know, pick up their guitar, go to the piano, and play a melody to try and marry the lyrics to the music. But it was almost universal, with very few exceptions, where it was the other way around. The music always came first and then the lyrics. As you know, I mean, who's not in the Elton John, who's not in the book, Bernie Taupin would write all the lyrics and hand them to Elton John, and he would take those and do as I just said. He would take words and then make music from them. But most of these artists, in some cases, it all came simultaneously, like the best across the board. All of the artists I spoke to said the best stuff are the ones that come naturally, where words and music just come right out of them. But that's the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how some songs are created, let's say 15, 20 minutes, and some songs have been like, I've got this idea, and somebody will put it in the drawer, and then maybe a year or two later, and then all of a sudden it's a song that everybody knows. I'm sure you probably came across that too.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, Tom Scholz of Boston, I think it was, he had the music, the first song he ever wrote music-wise was Foreplay. Foreplay and Long Time. But he didn't, it just ended. And then he had it, I think he said, for like almost 5 years before he came up with marrying that piece of music of Foreplay and then connecting it to Long Time, and then the lyrics came. And I think he said it was like a 5-year process.
Wow. But was one of their biggest successes. I mean, it's actually the song that kind of put them on the map. And you actually talked about in the book how surprised he was with success, because I think you had mentioned about, hey, I was going to go buy a house. And what did his accountant say?
Well, that was actually Brad Delp when they went out, because I spoke to the late Brad Delp, and they went out to promote that first record, and they were gone for many months. And Brad Delp told me that when he got back, he called his accountant and said, because he had been living in an apartment, he said, I'm thinking about buying a house. And the accountant said, how many do you want? And so that struck him. Tom Scholz at the time was working for Polaroid. And prior to them going out on tour for to promote that first album, his boss came to him and said, look, if you're thinking about going and do this music thing, I've got to let some people go. And if you're thinking about going and doing this music thing, I'd rather let you go than somebody else. And Tom Scholz looked at his boss and said, are you kidding? You know what the chances are of me making any kind of a living off of this music? It's like 1 in a million. Well, then the Boston album hits, and he gets back into town, and he goes in and he's cleaned out his office. He's got all his stuff in a box, and the elevator door opens. And just as the elevator door is opening, his boss walks out and looks at it and says, 1 in a million, huh? Well, it had to be somebody.
That's such a great story. And, obviously they had the biggest selling debut album of anybody. So persistency pays. Let's talk about one of the all-time great groups. And I know you've seen them in concert quite a bit, is the Eagles. And I thought it was really funny, some analogies with the Hotel California that Don Henley spoke about what the song really means and all that sort of stuff. Why don't you delve into that a little bit?
Okay, sure. That's interesting too, because that was part of why I wanted to write this book, was because when you and I were growing up, you and I grew up reading Rolling Stone magazine, right? Whenever, a new album came out, we'd have to get the album, and then we'd look for Rolling Stone, and there'd be interviews. And there was always, rock critics would always write about, well, this song means this and this song means this. And I would scour those articles and say, I don't see Glenn Frey's name written here. I don't see Don Henley's name written here. That's what your takeaway is of the song, but what were they really going after? And both Don Henley and Glenn Frey talked about how they were looking to try and push the envelope a little bit. And they spoke about how Steely Dan were very courageous when Walter Becker and Donald Fagen sat down at their writing table, how courageous they were at writing about deeper, a little darker things. And so they went about it that way. And to an extent, a lot of critics were accurate in that it's the Eagles' observations of the over-the-top 70s when, the party life and all that scene. But there's a lot more to it than just that. And in fact, speaking of Steely Dan, there's a line, stab it with their steely knives, but they just can't kill the beast. And I asked Don Henley if that was a payback to Steely Dan, because in one of Steely Dan's songs, Turn Up the Eagles, the Neighbors Are Listening, from the Royal Scam album, he said, well, it wasn't necessarily a payback per se, but yeah, we definitely admired those guys. They made a lot of really great records. And then he went on to describe what stabbing and what the steely knife means. Yeah. And people can read that in the book.
That's right. You had mentioned Steely Dan. We're both big fans. You spoke to their producer, and he made a phenomenal analogy that I can kind of see both Becker and Fagen working this way. But Gary had mentioned that they really didn't set out to make hit songs, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. They were, and a lot of the producers that I spoke to, and I spoke to several producers for these two books, they didn't go into the studio wanting to make a 2-minute or 3-minute song that would be played on AM top 40 radio. They all went in to make album cuts, and they weren't looking to try and fit it into the required length of time so that they would have airplay. They were going in with these, extravagant musical pieces that, as you know, after they got to their like third album, they started hiring session players to play all these different instruments on all of their records. So yeah, their records took a very, very long time. In fact, Gary Katz said, we would work every day. And I said, every day? He said, every day. I think it was the Gaucho album. They worked every day for a year straight. And if somebody said, I don't think I can come in tomorrow, they looked at them and said, you have a pressing engagement? Because they were just at it every single day.
That was about as subtle as an 100-pound weight falling from the Sears Tower. So yeah, we'll see you tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Hope you can be here, right? That was just what an analogy. You had spoken to one of the all-time great songwriters, and still going, God bless him, is Gordon Lightfoot. And you had mentioned how many songs Gordon Lightfoot has written. And I was trying to put that on a balance with acting. Somebody from way past in the 40s and 50s, Glenn Ford, I think he made like over 130 movies. But Gordon Lightfoot has written like a couple of hundred songs.
Oh yeah, well over 200. Well over 200, maybe 230, 240. And he wrote like 12 or 13 albums in a 14-year period. And I said to him, Gordon, that's just so remarkable. You're so prolific. And how did you do it? He said, well, I had a family to feed. That was my job. I had to do it. And he kind of made it like, well, what else am I going to do? It was my job as a songwriter, and I didn't think much of it. And he was, he's, as we both know, he's just a legend in Canada. He is the guy in Canada.
Yeah. For the people that don't know, Canadian broadcasting rules say they have to play, if you're on a music station, X amount of Canadian artists per hour. So therefore, they get a lot of airplay. And of course, he wrote "You Can Read My Mind," "Sundown." They're all classics. And he's very well detailed into the book. If you haven't noticed yet, Dan is a very big fan of the group Chicago. Another subtle moment right there, but you had spoken to one of your heroes, Jimmy Pankow. Did you ever talk to Jimmy? Because you've seen them, over 20 times in concert. Say, Jim, I was in row 4, seat 8. How many times now? Did you ever mention that to him when you were talking about songwriting with him?
No, I mean, I did mention that I was a big fan and that I had seen them many times. And I have a poster downstairs from their Hall of Fame induction. And at the bottom corner of it, and it's on the website, classicrocksongsrevealed.com. There's a picture of, there's a sheet of paper from when I met them, and with sincere thanks, Jimmy Pankow and Walt Parazater. And that's one of my big treasures, my big keepsakes. So, but yeah, talking to him talking to all of these artists and producers was a real thrill. But the thrill meter really peaked speaking to him, because I've admired his songwriting so much. And Make Me Smile and Ballet for a Girl in Buchanan is like my favorite piece of music. So to get him to describe that, and he was really into it too, which was really cool.
That's nice. That's nice. So let's talk about somebody like Jackson Browne. He was probably, reading through the book, one of the most methodical guys about putting anything down, whether it's a lyric or a melody. And he's also recorded some of the greatest stuff in I would just say exotic places too.
Yeah, you picked up on that. You're very observant. When Jackson Browne was starting out, he lived upstairs from two guys named Glenn Fry and J.D. Souther. They lived below him. And J.D. Souther, who's also in the book, mentioned that Jackson Browne was the only musician they ever knew that actually even practiced music before noontime. And he said that Jackson Browne would sit at the piano and play that opening riff of Dr. My Eyes over and over and over. And JD said he played it so much I wanted to throttle him. But yeah, he really, you know, a lot of these guys are just, and Jackson Browne especially, are perfectionists, and it shows in their work.
And the best thing about any piece of art is what it stands the test of time, right? And
Right.
definitely with these people, there's no question about that. Any surprises as far as people that you talk to that you might have a preconceived notion about some of their music and said, I didn't know that?
Surprises. Well, I'll tell you what surprised me is Al Stewart. Okay, and now Al Stewart was somebody who I liked his music a lot, and I interviewed him probably near the end. There was probably 10 or 12 after him, but all of the people that I had spoken to prior to Al Stewart had all talked about, you know, in a similar vein, like Billy Joel, that how lyric writing was challenging. Well, then I run into and get a chance to speak to Al Stewart, who's just a tremendous guy. And lyric writing for him was a snap. In fact, he said that he would write 3 or 4 sets of lyrics for every song on his Year of the Cat album. And Year of the Cat had 2 or 3 different iterations that he talked about. And he said that it's so easy for him to rhyme that when he's having a conversation with somebody, he's talking to them and he can rhyme in his head what they're talking about. And yeah, and his vocabulary is off the charts. And the amount of research that the man does, he's a voracious reader, and he reads hundreds of books, and it might take him 10 or 20 years later, and he'll write a song about something that he's researched about. So that kind of surprised me to hear that, to run into an artist like that did so much research and that had no difficulty whatsoever writing lyrics.
Yeah. Let's go back on something you said there with thinking of things real quick and going to today's music. I think Gary Katz had mentioned with Steely Dan about people sampling their music. Not his thing, but has to respect it, right?
Yeah. You mentioned the term stands the test of time, and that's where I feel, you know, the amount of time that it took me to write this book is validated by the fact that all of these musicians are still relevant in classic rock, and all of their music are so timeless. And yeah, and Becker and Fagan were, to your point with Gary Katz, they were very particular about the people that played on their records. In fact, I'm sure you've probably seen The Making of Asia. Oh yeah, where they sit and go through, you know, the guitar solos for Peg and all of that. And
yeah.
No, next.
One of my all-time favorite quotes dealing with Steely Dan is my favorite saxophone player, Tom Scott, who has played on a number of their big songs. And he said during the release of one album, he goes, somewhere in a basement in Los Angeles is some of the greatest music that no one will ever hear because they didn't think it was up to snuff. Anybody else, it would have been a grand slam. Just like your book, Classic Rock Songs Revealed, volumes 1 and 2. Dan, a pleasure having you on. The book is pre-sale now. I will definitely have you back because we only scratched the surface of all these great artists. And if you could, because you're being very generous, what charity you're donating some of the proceeds to?
I've got a couple of that I've got in mind, but one in particular is Voices of the Martyrs. It's a Christian-based organization, people that are persecuted for their religious beliefs, and so that's the main one.
Yeah. Well, listen, we have so much stress and tension in the world right now, and nothing like music kind of brings everybody down, brings their elevation up. You hear your favorite song and you're feeling good. If you go into this book, I think you'll feel really good about your favorite artists and favorite songs. And like I said, we'll have you back again, but thanks so much for being on.
Thanks so much, Cos. Before I just want to thank you for all of your support throughout this entire process. You were just you've always been such a great friend, but throughout this whole thing, that I so many times I thought about giving up, and between my wife and great friends, and especially people like you just kept pushing me to complete it, and I'm forever indebted to you for it.
Oh, no problem. Hey, we got it done. Can't wait for the next book.
Yep.
Have a great one, buddy. Thanks.
Thanks.